What better way is there to kick off this new monthly series than to talk about the movies from the franchise this channel is mostly based around? So before we begin, I need to explain how the series is going to work. We'll start with my history of the franchise, then move on to each and every one of these movies in order, comparing my past opinions to my present, and conclude with my final thoughts. And no, I won't be covering Race for the Sodor Cup for two reasons. One, I haven't seen it, and two, this is All Engines Go we're talking about. You know, the reboot that even the kids hate.
Oh no! Anyway, last week...
We've a lot of ground to cover, so we'll start at the very bottom and work our way up. My history with the Thomas movies begins in 2008, where I was screwing around on my good old Windows XP, and I happened to stumble across a trailer for The Great Discovery. I was intrigued by this trailer, and had to find out more about this thing I found. Unfortunately, it will be another year before I got the DVD of this movie alongside Hero of the Rails for Christmas. After watching The Great Discovery, I almost immediately watched Hero of the Rails, and was completely blown away with the new style. As the years went on, I regularly caught up with the DVD releases of the two following movies. Not much to say regarding my history with these two, thank God. 2012 was the first time I was exposed to Thomas and the Magic Railroad, when I found a trailer remake. Somehow. And from there, fell in love with the chase scene. So it was no surprise that I was enthralled when in Easter 2012, I got a Trackmaster Diesel 10 and the movie on DVD, only to be disappointed when Thomas wasn't in the movie that much. 2012 was also the first year I ever saw Thomas in cinemas. I have very fond memories of going to View on the 1st of September with my cousin to see Blue Mountain Mystery, and to say I enjoyed it would be a straight up understatement. The next year, while I was thinking of seeing King of the Railway, I ended up not doing so in the end, because at the time it was in cinemas, I was on holiday in Jersey. Though the next year, I was more successful in seeing Tale of the Brave. After that, I saw every Thomas movie when it was being played at View every year, until 2017. When on the 25th of August that year, I saw Journey Beyond Sodor, and due to the horrors I was seeing regarding BWBA, I decided not to see the movie at the cinema. Until idiot me decided to give some cam rips of the movie I found on YouTube a watch. Don't ask, I had nothing else to do that day. So before I talk about the movies and compare my past opinions to my present, I need to explain how I'm going to talk about them. I'm going to go over the characters, the story, what I liked and disliked overall in comparison to what I thought previously, and then move on to the next movie, and repeat that pattern until the conclusion. I have rewatched all of these movies in preparation for this video, and this will be based around my opinion and nobody else's. I'm very sorry, but this is still a Thomas movie, and so for that reason, I will be talking about it. I know you don't want me to, I don't want to either, because this movie is just a smeared mess of stories and characters. So to begin, the characters. I won't be going over the Sodor characters because I think we all know who all the engines are. Instead, we'll be going over the human characters. Beginning with Mr. Conductor. I'm really not sure what the best way to describe him is. He is the character we follow most of the movie in terms of the whole gold dust situation. While Alec Baldwin did a brilliant job acting wise, it isn't really enough to stop the whole purpose of his character being confusing. We also got Burnett Stone, who for most of the movie is just moping about his engine and his past wife, who we never see in any flashbacks because this movie has no idea how to use the show don't tell concept. Then there's Lily, who is... I don't know. She just exists. Let's just move on to by far the best human character in the movie, Junior. Most of his scenes are just amazing. Michael E. Rogers was really having fun with his acting here, and he does provide something resembling entertainment whenever he's on screen. As for the other humans, they're just pointless, and mostly only exist for callbacks to that show I haven't seen a single clip of. So that's it for characters. How does the story hold up? Well, there's just too much going on. To start, the plot about the lost engine needed to be steamed ASAP to produce more gold dust and save the magical railroad, which we don't see until 51.5 minutes into the movie. This plot goes on for way too long. There's Mr. Conductor on a continuous mission to try and gain more gold dust. There's Lily, who's going to see Burnett. For some reason, it's never explained. But then just lets a random dog lead her onto the wrong train in a plot that does not make sense. And a plot about Diesel 10 wanting to destroy the lost engine. Again, for some reason. And out of all of these plots, Thomas isn't mentioned in one of them. Thomas and his friends are literally a plot device in this movie, to the point that it shouldn't even be called a Thomas movie. Aside from that, what I really enjoyed about this movie was the chase. It did feel like it was trying to be a proper climax, and it did manage to deliver on being a proper climax. Although, somehow I didn't see it as exciting as it was before my rewatch. And in terms of voice acting for the engines, Gordon, Henry and Toby's voices were the best of the lot. I wasn't really keen on Toby's as a kid, but on my rewatch I saw it as passable. As for what I didn't like, I'm pretty sure you know what I'm going to say. The addition of magic. I really don't know what Britt was thinking, or if she took a minute to think that adding in magic would disregard anything the series presented in the past with its realism. It was fine before my rewatch, but after it just felt like a kick in the balls. I haven't yet seen the director's cut of the movie fully, but when the day comes that I do, I will talk about it. Thankfully, it's safe to assume that this movie is not canon. I'm genuinely being honest when I tell you that I could not get past the first 10 minutes of calling all engines without wanting to turn it off. Purely because of how boring and generic it was. Let's dive in. So I guess we could say the new characters in this movie were Diesel 10 and Lady, despite them being in Thomas and the Non-Canon Railroad. But it's okay, because just like all the seasons up until this movie heavily retcons that movie. So in this movie, Diesel 10 is presented as a Diesel that every Steamy fears, but is also a Diesel who will agree to help the Steamies when it's urgent, showing us that Diesel 10 is a bit of a complex character, which I found out during my rewatch. Lady is also handled amazingly in this movie, as a figment of Thomas's imagination, showing him what the right thing to do is. That is how you make Lady work. While those two characters were handled well in this movie, the story was not handled well. Some people say the plot with the airport building and the Steamy versus Diesel conflict was boring, but for me, it is just plain predictable. Not only that, but there are so many needless elements which ruin the movie. 6 learning segments to bump up the runtime, songs with generic lyrics yet quite good instrumental, dialogue scenes so long that you'll just want to skip to the next bit quickly, and Michelangelo's doing his best to sound as bored as possible. I may have rambled about the lows of this movie enough, so now for the highs. The scenes where all the models from the sets to the engines themselves are tortured. Those were aspects I loved even before my rewatch. I also loved how they had the balls to show both sides being as bad as each other, but also as good as each other. Very sadly, this was the only time the Hit era handled the Steamies vs Diesels conflict right. That's really all I have to say about this movie. You tell me what more there is to say about it. I'm very happy to say that we're now diving into the first good movie of the bunch. I really enjoyed this one on my rewatch. So the new characters, or character, is Stanley. He's basically a Buzz Lightyear to Thomas in the sense that he's better than Thomas in every regard, and everyone starts preferring him over Thomas, leading to Thomas doing something nasty to him. It culminates in disaster, and yet Stanley still cares deeply about Thomas, even after he was being such a jerk to him, resulting in an incredibly heartwarming scene where Stanley eventually finds Thomas and they both level the playing field. So that was Stanley. What's the story like? In this movie, Thomas comes across a ghost town named Great Waterton, and the Fat Controller has it restored in time for the Sodor Day celebrations. That's a pretty interesting story that not many kids shows like Thomas did at the time. What I especially enjoyed about this movie was the heavy usage of different characters. On my rewatch, I noticed they brought almost everyone out for this one. And the songs are very catchy and have little to no generic lyrics whatsoever. In fact, during my rewatch, I was actually starting to sing along to them. And the mineshaft scene, while it does piss on realism's face, it does at the same time feel exciting. Especially with Pierce Brosnan's narration here.
Whee! Thomas whistled and whoa! He cried!
In fact, the one thing I really don't like about this movie is the scene where Thomas exits the mine. It was just strange. Like, how was Thomas able to fly across the ravine instead of falling straight away like when he crashed through the blocked tunnel? Is a little consistency too much to ask? Aside from that, everything else about this movie is excellent. And this is the first Thomas movie I actually recommend. Let's start this off by saying I went into my rewatch hoping to really enjoy this one. And I did. So to begin, characters. Hero is a very interesting character. I love his history of once living an amazing life as master of the railway, and when he broke down, his entire career came crashing down as well. I also really like Victor and Kevin. They are a very fun double act, and Victor is one of the most developed characters from the CGI era. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I suppose I should talk about the film's antagonist, who is Sodor. And he is a brilliant choice for an antagonist, as not only did it dive into Spencer's character a bit more, but it also broke the barrier of constantly having Diesels as antagonists, which I greatly approve of. So what's this movie about? Well, in this one, Thomas comes across an abandoned engine named Hero, and with the help of his friends, tries to repair him without telling the Fat Controller. It does sound predictable when read out, but the movie does try to make the story unpredictable at the same time. Going into my rewatch, I was expecting to not be too fond of the new voice cast, but to my surprise, they were actually alright. James's new voice was just refreshing after hearing Michael Angelus's dreadful James voice from the Hit era. I mean, seriously, would you rather listen to this?
He'll never have a shiny coat like mine.
Or this?
Have you seen the new engine? Yes!
I also surprisingly liked the scene that featured Emily and Spencer's dynamic. That was quite fun to watch. As were all the chases and runaways that this movie featured. Especially the final one. Even with that stupid line.
But he couldn't get in front of Thomas.
Yeah, because I'm definitely going to believe that the fastest type of steam locomotive in the world can be outrun by an E2 that can only go 70 miles an hour. If there's another thing I wasn't really fond of, it would be the movie does get a bit repetitive in the middle. As in, there'll be a moment where Spencer is too distracted to see insert character name here go by with parts for hero. That's something that pops up at least 4 times in the middle section of this movie, and it felt annoying on this latest rewatch. Other than that, I would recommend watching this movie. The best way to describe this movie would be a solid start for an awful era. Okay, so now we go from a masterpiece to a disaster piece. What is there even to say about this movie that hasn't been said? Well, I can say that I found Misty Island to be an amazing place when I was 4, but now it makes 0 sense. So in terms of new characters, we get the goddamn logging locos, who are absolute prat heads and make no sense. We also got Captain, who's a nothing character. He only has 1 or 2 scenes in the movie where he does something and it just feels shoved in. All that aside, the story is just plain awful from the top to bottom. It starts with needless filler and exposition, racist Thomas and plot devices, and the rest of it is just Thomas being a douche sack and more scenes that don't make sense. Like, why is Whiff being instructed to work with Gordon, only for them to not appear together again? I'd say the best thing about this movie is the build-up to Whiff and Percy's breakthrough in the tunnel. The music slaps, the tension rises from just seeing Whiff and Percy's determined expressions, and Michelangelo sounds somewhat excited. I also absolutely love the teaser at the end with Diesel 10. Those are literally the only good parts. I'm not going to go over everything else I hate about this movie, because if I did, we'd be here all day. So all I'll say about this movie is not to watch it. Can we move on now? We can? Good. And from one terrible experience to another. I, again, don't know what I'm supposed to say about this, but I'll begin with the characters. So to start, Diesel 10. This take on him is interesting. Talking to Percy in a way that makes him sound like a nice character, when really, he's using Percy for his whole scheme. That is a very interesting idea. Speaking of Percy, he's the lead character. And he's just an absolute moron. But that's understandable, so have a great day. Den and Dart were a fun double act. I do enjoy their dynamics, and especially when they interact with other characters like Diesel 10. As for the 2 fire engines, well, we can forget they exist because they only appear like 27% of the movie. So what's the story like? I think the story idea is conceptually good, but executionally bad. The whole story is basically Diesel 10 manipulating Percy into thinking he's his friend, and then using Percy to accomplish his plan, and double-crossing Percy when his plan works. See? That idea could have been used to its complete advantage, but instead, it's used as a way of disregarding one of the best parts of calling all engines, and showing us how this island is so extremist in this movie. I'm not going to go over all the problems, because like with Misty Island Rescue, you wouldn't hear the end of it. But if there's 2 things this special did right, it would be the gag with Diesel 10 getting locked in the shed made me chuckle a bit, although it didn't make me laugh as much as before my rewatch, and the way this special was marketed. I think this was the best special when it comes to marketing. They made a teaser at the end of Misty Island, and produced this amazing book, which I did own, but can't find anymore. Aside from that, I really don't think this movie is worth your time for how mean-spirited and dull it is. Before I talk about Blue Mountain Mystery, just cast your minds back to 2019 for a moment, when I had my old account. You know, when annoying, unscripted, loud, repeating what people have already said for the hell of it 13-year-old me said that this was my favourite Thomas movie. Well, I still stick by that. To begin the character category, there's Luke. He's an absolutely amazing and relatable character. Throughout his first appearances, we learn that he's been feeling guilty for reasons unknown until it's finally explained. That is very interesting. As for the other new characters, they only exist because the other character I want to talk about is Victor, as he is the best aspect of the movie. The fact they bothered to make a plot twist and expand on Victor of all characters really makes this movie all the more of an incredible experience. So this movie's story is when Thomas is sent to stand in for Paxton at the Blue Mountain Quarry, he notices a strange green engine named Luke rushing about and hiding. So it's up to Thomas to try and piece together the matter and find out who the yellow engine is to prevent Luke from getting sent away from Sodor. What I especially liked about this movie was how it utilised 3 callbacks to the classic series, as shockingly, they actually impact the plot, and aren't just obligatory fan service that Season 18 was in love with. I also adored the opening scene, as this was the first Thomas special to feature a prologue, and it was exciting as hell. On my rewatch, I had very fond flashbacks of me being blown away by this scene in the cinema. I could not get enough of it. The only thing I really don't like about this movie is that stupid epilogue. Why? It was absolutely pointless. The movie ended on such a good note, and then this yellow engine joke comes in that only serves as stopping Rheneas from whining about being repainted. You could cut this epilogue out, and there wouldn't be any difference at all. Other than that, this is my favourite Thomas movie of the lot. Let's just say the Miller era was terrible, but it started and ended amazingly. I wholeheartedly recommend this one. You know how I said Hero of the Rails was a solid start for an awful era? Well, on my rewatch of King of the Railway, I came to the conclusion that this was a solid start for a fantastic era. 3 of the new characters in this movie are fantastic. Stephen is a wonderful addition to the franchise. On my rewatch, I realised how funny he actually was, from his lines, Bob Golding's delivery, and Stephen's character overall, especially since he is the king of impersonating others as seen in Season 21. Millie was also a fun character, as was the Earl, the latter being featured in one of the funniest scenes of the movie. As for the story, it's quite convoluted, but not as convoluted as Thomas and the Crimea Cadbury Crunchy Railroad. This movie has Thomas, Percy and James working together, Gordon and Spencer racing, and Stephen trying to find out what his new job is, all mushed together to revolve around the restoration of Ulstead Castle. Well, at least in those plots we get no more rhyming or alliteration and actual banter between the characters again.
You don't need 3 engines to pull 1 flatbed. OK, James, you can stay behind.
If there's one thing I wasn't fond of on my rewatch, it would be the animation. It definitely looks like it could have been better, especially by 2013 standards. Need I go on about the songs? They're generic.
Sunshine everywhere. Up, down, left, right, look over there.
Reused. And annoying.
Now everybody say hey, hey, it's gonna be a great day.
But aside from the terrible animation and boring songs, I'd say this one is also worth a watch for how much the writing has improved and changed since the Miller era. It isn't perfect by any means, but it is still a vast improvement. This is an absolutely wonderful movie. It was actually a lot better on this latest rewatch. To begin with, Gator is the main new character, and he is the best part of the movie. His whole backstory was honestly the most inspiring part of the movie, especially with the whole moral about what being brave is truly about. Marion was also a really fun character. While during my rewatch it occurred to me that she was a Thomas interpretation of Little Miss Chatterbox in her introductory scene, it just led to some brilliant delivery from Olivia Colman. The other two newbies are Timothy and Reg, who don't add a whole lot to the story. Timothy's just there waiting to be expanded on in season 18, and Reg is the second most nothing character behind Captain, who only appears in one scene throughout the whole thing. They just feel like they were written in last minute just to give Tim Whitnell a character or two to voice, and also because So what's Tale of the Brave's story? Well, in this movie, Thomas comes across some rocks with footprints at the clay pits, and ignites a whole "do monsters exist" thing, making Percy uncertain and timid, and giving James a chance to joke about Percy for it. From that summary, the plot could have been something from the Miller era, if Gator wasn't a part of the whole thing. Speaking of the Miller era, this is something I only just noticed on my rewatch, but it was a joke about Up, Up and Away.
Let me see. Have you been asked to deliver a giant balloon on a flatbed?
No.
Andrew and his little gang love pleasing us with lines like that. Another scene I had my eyes glued to was this scene where Cranky was trying to stop the ship. It was intense, from the outstanding music to Ben Small shrieking. It felt very season 5, and that thought never struck my mind when I was 8 for some reason. While this movie is a fantastic watch, it still does have some issues. One of them is the animation again. While they did fix it a lot since King of the Railway, it's still mediocre. I think it's safe to say that this is my second favourite Thomas movie behind Blue Mountain Mystery. Yes, I know. Me preferring this over the next two movies is a sin against God. How dare I? But opinions do exist, people. Now time to talk about everyone's favourite movie. And while it's not my personal favourite, it still is in the top 3. So the characters of this movie are the first 5 engines: Thomas, Edward, Henry, Gordon and James. And I have to say, they handled them incredibly well, even if they took some liberties here and there. And the fact they took the time to reskin Thomas and James into their green and black liveries respectively, that was a very surprising touch. So what's the story of this movie? It's basically Edward and Gordon, sad story of Henry, almost Edward, Gordon and Henry, Thomas and Gordon, Thomas's train, Thomas and the trucks and Thomas and the breakdown train, retold in CGI. And they did an excellent job recreating them. Even if Thomas and the breakdown train was changed drastically so there could be an exciting chase. Now let's address the other elephant in the room. The music recreations. This was Robert Hartshorn's best music he ever composed for the series. On my rewatch, I noticed some themes I never noticed before, and thought the Runaway theme wasn't as good as it could have been. It just felt a bit slow compared to the amazing work of the original. And to be honest, I didn't really care that much for Judy and Jerome. They were great in season 20, I'll give them that, but here they're just there. But the other characters are fantastic, aside from Henry, who's a wimp and in his new shape for some reason. I definitely recommend this movie. It may not be my personal favourite, but it is one of the best. Everyone has sung the praises of this movie ever since its release, and it is definitely not hard to see why. The new characters introduced in this movie are Ryan, Skiff and Sailor John. While I had no problems with Ryan when I was 9, on this rewatch I was kinda wishing that they kept his overconfident persona he was originally going to have. Skiff and Sailor John were the best characters in the movie by far. I love how throughout most of the movie, Skiff is just perfectly fine with Sailor John treating him like doo-doo because he has no other option, but But during the climax, he finally decides Sailor John's taking his awful ways too far and throws him off. That is amazing character development. As for the story, it is amazing. When Thomas gets into the most trouble he's ever been in, he gets his branch line taken away from him, and he gets sent to work on the new branch line, where continuous evidence of Captain Callus's ship and stolen treasure piles up. My favourite aspect of the movie, on this latest rewatch, has to be how the miniature engines were used. They not only served a brilliant purpose during the final climax, but also had a brilliant song.
When we were both green, passengers kept calling me Mike.
Need I even bring up the score as a whole? You know all that I was saying about The Adventure Begins being the best of Robert Hartshorne? Well, I was lying. This was the best of Hartshorne. This was the last Thomas production he composed, having been on board since season 8, and he definitely ended his career on an amazing note. I also really loved the clever thing they did with Thomas's symbolic number 1, when they covered it up when Thomas was lower than he's ever been before. If there's anything I dislike about this movie, anything at all, it would be one thing. 2 words. Fan service.
Duck, the Great Western engine, was working in the construction yard, where supplies for the new branch line were being delivered.
Oh my God! Look who it is!
Seriously though, Donald and Douglas are severely inconsequential to the plot of this movie. They only appear because... Wait, why do they appear? Other than that, when I went into my rewatch, I was only expecting it to be great. I wasn't expecting for it to be incredible. I definitely recommend it. Well, we just went from 3 of the best movies to a mediocre movie. Just like Day of the Diesels, this movie is conceptually good, but is executionally not so good. I'm not going over all the new characters because they aren't anything special, so I'll only go over 3 of them. Ashima is basically a sign to all of us. What do I mean by sign? Well, she's a sign that tells us that Mattel has officially run out of ideas for new characters. Her first few scenes feature her being disliked by Thomas, but Thomas eventually opens up to her. How many times have we seen that trope? Too many. Then we got Flying Scotsman. I love the way they presented him with Gordon, as a cocky brother that completely contradicts his persona in the Railway series, which I am A-OK with. And then there's Vinny, who is absolutely wonderful as a jerk towards the worldwide appreciated Philip. All I can say, really. So now for the story, which is basically just that season 11 episode that nobody remembers with minor modifications. Basically, Thomas trying to prove he can be something he's not to go to the Train Olympics, I guess, that we don't see until 35 minutes into the runtime. That's one of the biggest problems with this movie. It reuses old plot elements we're fed up with. For instance, Thomas wanting to go to the show and prove that he can be more than what he is. Basically the pre-mentioned season 11 episode again. Thomas getting mad because someone else is pulling his coaches. Basically Emily's new coaches. Thomas and the new engine. The Great Discovery. And last year's special again. The list is endless. Another thing I didn't like even before my rewatch was that jerky camera movement whenever we're focusing on 1 or 2 characters. What were they going for here? But there are a number of good things about the movie. Some I picked up on during my rewatch that my 10-year-old self wouldn't have. For example, the side gags are pretty funny, and they do make the boring dialogue scenes they featured in entertaining to an extent. And secondly, the songs. I was literally singing all the lyrics to Will You Won't You and streamlining the second they began. Either way, this movie was mediocre and left a lot to be desired. But my god, it just gets worse. So here we are at the technical start of what we'll call the Miller era Take 2. There is just so much about this movie to not like. We'll begin the characters with the main antagonists, Hurricane and Frankie. If I'm honest, they were trying too hard to make them twist villains, if that even was the whole point. Then there's the experimentals. Big shock, Lexi and Theo are terrible and Merlin is the best one. Not much to say. And Beresford, another completely pointless character whose only purpose is to bump up the runtime and make this movie 70 minutes instead of 60. It seems like Mattel doesn't even care about him, hence why they didn't make any merchandise of him. So how does the story hold up? So in this movie, Thomas steals James's goods train to take it to Bridlington, but on the way he gets taken in by the two Steelworks engines, who then hold him hostage because...
We only wanted some help!
Really? There could have been so much more. Like maybe a moment where Hurricane actually decides Frankie's taking it too far and ditches her to get the authorities involved? That could have been something. Let's just move on to the worst aspect of the movie. The infamous Chuggington physics. Or bouncing, or gesturing, whatever you want to call it. What the hell were they thinking here? What were they trying to achieve with this new element? Were they thinking that making the engines this light would gain more attention from the kiddies? Although this movie does have some quite good shots here and there, as well as a brilliant song at the end. Speaking of songs, I now cannot get The Hottest Place in Town out of my head. Aside from the highs and lows, this movie isn't really a good one. Would I call it worse than The Great Race? Just a bit. The Brenner era did go downhill from here. And the next movie is just proof that everything's crashed and burned. And now we come to Wilbert Audrey doing backflips in his grave. I could not even reach the 60-minute mark without turning this godforsaken movie off. And I was incredibly close to making it. So the new characters in this movie include Ace and Nia. To begin, Ace. I do not like this character. Peter Andre does a fine job voicing Ace, and his song is amazing, but Ace is an absolute dick. He just convinces Thomas to play a trick on Nia because all he cared about was getting to the next race. Not to mention, his design just does not fit in with this show at all. Then there's Nia, who's a fine character, in this movie at least. She was a brilliant contrast to Thomas in her first scenes, and throughout the movie she does serve her purpose. But she still isn't anything too special. As for the story, let's just say they took the
"I want to see the world"
line far too literally, and made it into this movie. Not much to say. I suppose there are two things to like about this movie. One of them being Ace's song, and the other would be that they actually bothered to give Yong Bao a line of dialogue or two or three after just being a nothing character in The Great Race. The rest of the movie, however, is just plain stereotypical, boring, has you questioning constantly, and straight up ridiculous. This felt like the first Thomas special to not feel like Thomas at all. Shoving Thomas and the Mountain Dew is the best Sodor ever made railroad to the side for a minute. But this movie does say a lot about Mattel and their decisions, doesn't it? So after that reading of all the Thomas movies, what are my final opinions on these movies? Thomas and the Magic Railroad, disastrous. Calling All Engines, plain boring and dull. The Great Discovery, the first good Thomas movie. Hero of the Rails, A solid start for an awful era. Misty Island Rescue, easily in the bottom 3. Day of the Diesels, conceptually good but executionally bad. Blue Mountain Mystery, my personal favourite. King of the Railway, great but the animation could have been better. Tale of the Brave, second in the top 3 list. The Adventure Begins, third in the top 3 list. Sodor's Legend of the Lost Treasure, fantastic. The Great Race, could have been so much better. Journey Beyond Sodor, the weakest of the Brenner era. Big World, Big Adventures, absolutely horrendous. So there you have it. That was my look back on every single Thomas movie. Rewatching these movies was honestly fun, but hopefully I won't be talking about that many movies again. And for next month's instalment of the series, I do want to challenge myself a bit, but talk about less movies.